This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the podcast, I have Harry Markowitz. Harry is the father of modern finance. He has a Nobel Prize to prove it. Harry was also kind enough to appear in my documentary film a few years back. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. How are you, sir? You do realize we met a few years back, right?
Yes, I remember. You interviewed me, didn't you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We came out to Pacific Beach area and interviewed.
Right,
yes. Absolutely. My little podcast has grown quite a bit, and so I thought it would be a perfect time after seeing some comments of yours in the press, and I thought it'd be a perfect time to reach out and maybe let you explain, and I have some questions here and some thoughts and some ideas, let you explain a little bit about Harry Markowitz and how you came to win a Nobel Prize. But I would love to go back to the beginning, Harry, just briefly, but I would also like to really jump into the one big picture issue. And I spoke with a guy named Justin Fox, who wrote the myth of the Rational Market. I have a feeling you guys have chatted before. And the thing that was really interesting in speaking with Justin is that he pointed out that your original work, your seminal work, was designed to show people what we should do, what could be done, and that at some step along the way, that became an assumption that we were doing that, which then came into, to some degree, people might say, the myth of the rational market. So how was that? How do you think your peers after you made that jump?
Excuse me for blowing my nose. We're having a Santa Ana, which means it's very hot here, which means I'm under air conditioning, which means I'll have to blow my nose once in a while, which I have to do once in a while in San Diego because there's things blooming all year around that. Let me go over Mike. Let me go over that history a bit. In 1952, my paper, my article, Journal of Finance article, I said John Burr Williams clearly is missing something because he said that the value of a stock should be the present value of its future dividends. I thought about future dividends are uncertain. He must mean the expected value of future dividends. And later in the book, I was reading this at the University of Chicago's Business School Library, John Burr Williams, later in the book, he does say, yes, if things are uncertain, you should use the expected value. And my thought process was, well, if you only use the expected value for security, you must be only interested in expected value for the portfolio, and you maximize the expected value for the portfolio by putting all your eggs in one basket, just buying one security, whatever has the highest expected value. And I know that wasn't plausible. So I thought, well, people do, in fact, diversify and that's because they're worried about risk as well as return and so on. So in my 1952 paper, I said I am proposing the mean variance criteria both as a hypothesis about how people do act and a prescription as to how they should act. That was in 1952. By 1959, of my 1959 book, I nowhere do I say that this is a hypothesis about the way people do act. I just speak of it as normatively. This is the way they should act. This is as related to the theory of rational decision-making under risk and uncertainty. This is the way they should act. And that wasn't because I forgot that, you ought to have positive as well as normative hypotheses or rules or whatever. It was just that by 1959, I was no longer convinced that this was a full description of the way that people do act. So it goes like this, that in 50, as far as I'm concerned, as I was concerned, 1952, I proposed it as a hypothesis about how people do act and a prescription how they should act. By 1959, it was just a prescription. Now we jump ahead to Bill Sharp's 1964 article, in which he proposes this as a he proposed the capital asset pricing model, in which he proposed this as a hypothesis about the way markets do act, and therefore how individual investors do act. And he said, some of the assumptions may be questionable, but I think he quotes Milton Friedman as saying, you should look at the verifiable implications, and if they work out, never mind whether the assumptions are precisely right. The theory is good. It's a good predictor. That history, little by little, or maybe very quickly, got forgotten, and then people just said, let's explain the world, the way economists do, homo economicus, whatever. And then, of course, along came the behavioral folks and said, no, that's not the way people act.
How did you feel about your prescription and some of your ideas somewhat getting interpreted into dogma?
Well, once I had written the 1959 book, I was off doing other things. The year before I got the Nobel Prize for Portfolio Theory, I got an award from Tim Zorsa. This is the Institute of Management Science and the Operations Research Society of America, for three things I did. One was for portfolio theory, which I later, a year later, I got the Nobel Prize for. One was for sparse matrix techniques. These are large systems of simultaneous equations, which most of whose coefficients are zero, so the non-zeros are sparse, and I figured out how to solve very large systems of that sort, that if you use some packaged system for solving big systems of equations, they will use this Markowitz method with sparse matrices. And the third was a simulation language, a computer language, SimScript, which in its day was used widely for simulation programming. So I was off doing other things. I would talk with Bill Sharp from time to time, and he told me what was happening in the field, and I didn't really try to catch up with the literature until many years later, I started to teach. So the fact that here this 1952 article, 1959 book was catching on in great part to Bill Sharp's efforts was very pleasant to me.
I would love you to take a step back too, in the sense that what we're ultimately talking about is that you're right there putting together novel ideas about portfolios, risk, return, correlations, diversification. But once you put this work together and you hit the streets, so to speak, Wall Street was not really interested in somebody who wanted to track their predictions and take a look at probabilities and in risk measures. They weren't really interested in you at that time, were they, Harry?
No, it was a long, slow development. If you look at the literature, I think Mark Rubenstein did in a reprint, a reprinting of Markowitz 1959. I can't remember, roughly around 1970 or something like that. Mark Rubenstein added a bibliography. In other words, when I published in 1959, I had a bibliography, a short one, and Mark Rubenstein did a survey for me. He offered it, and I was delighted to accept a survey of what had gone on in portfolio theory since 1959. And as I say, this was maybe early 70s or something like that. He, in the process of collecting this bibliography, which he sort of had at hand anyway, he's sort of our historian of the field. of the theory field. He pointed out there was maybe half a dozen or a dozen articles written on portfolio theory between, let's say, 1952, at most 2 dozen, between 1952 and 1963. It was Bill Sharp's 1963 article on a simplified model of portfolio selection, the one-factor model, and then right after that, the next year, Bill Sharp's 1964 article, which introduced CAP-M, which really started bringing attention to the field. And while I was, hanging around the Rand Corporation, developing SimScript or so on, Bill was out proselytizing. I mean, and he was making a living. I think as a professor, but at that time he changed his careers. But he was out drumming up business as a consultant. He got Merrill Lynch interested in the measurement of betas and so on and so forth. So, and then little by little, it exploded. In the 60s, academic folks were getting more and more interested. By the 70s, you had Bar Rosenberg out making a bigger and bigger living teaching portfolio theory. So it grew at an exponential pace, but slowly at first, and then increasingly.
Hey, as I jump back to your original thinking, and I've read a little bit about how you got inspired with your original paper, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was some foundation here, or was it related to, or you had seen other work, wartime calculations on bomb fragmentation, and it essentially came down to how much power do you want to sacrifice to have greater probability of hitting. And that type of thinking was also the exact same type of thinking in your original work. Am I going the right direction?
I don't. My original work, my 1952, as I explained, the thought process was one where I read, somehow it's a little bit of a story. I decided I was at the University of Chicago at the stage where I was had to pick out a dissertation topic. Something put me in the direction of looking at the applicability of econometric techniques to the stock market. My thesis advisor, Yasha Marshak, sent me over to Marshall Ketchum in the business school, who gave me a reading list that included Graham and Dodd, which I read, Wiesenberger Investment Companies and Their Portfolios, which I'd read, and then I was in the process of reading John Burr Williams' Theory of Investment Value. And as I said earlier in the conversation, it was his assertion that the value of a stock should be the present value of its future dividends, which I interpret as expected value, et cetera, which finally put me onto the notion that people do diversify, and they should diversify, and we were talking about, and I describe risk as in terms of standard deviation, because that's what everybody uses. And so the notion of having target values or anything like that was not there. It was not at all there. It was just a sequence. John Burr Williams is wrong. It cannot be just expected value. It must be risk and return. Or conventionally, statisticians use standard deviation or variance equivalent, and let's try that. And it seems to, as I said in the paper, in 1952 paper, this hypothesis gives diversification for the right reason. And the right reason was to, reduce covariance and, minimize the, if you're interested in variance, you must, get securities that don't have high covariance. And so that's why, and you diversify. So that these other, alternate measures of risk or alternate, ways of dealing with risk was not at all in my mind at that time, or for the 1959 book.
Gotcha. I thought it was also interesting. I caught a comment from Friedman, and he said that when he was talking about your work early on, he said, it's not econ, it's not math, it's not business,
yes.
It's finance. It's finance.
Yes, that was true. I had, hang on, Mike, let me get a little sip of water I have laid out here a second.
Sure.
Hang on. I had, but the punchline was Marshak's. So let me tell you that story. Professor Yasha Marshak, or Jacob Marshak, was my advisor. I was at the Coles Commission. The book is the Coles Commission monograph 16 is the portfolio 1959 book. So he was my advisor. He was the one who sent me over to Marshall Ketchum and so on. He was the head of my committee, and really the only one I work with it all. So I had left Chicago with everything done but the dissertation. I went to the Rand Corporation. Was my first. Rand Corporation in Santa Monica was my first job out of University of Chicago. I was on a trip. It took me a couple of years or so to finish the dissertation, get it written up, and sent off. I was on a trip to the Washington, D.C. office of the Rand Corporation. I was coming back, and I stopped in Chicago to defend my dissertation. I remember landing at Midway Airport. This was before O'Hare. I remember landing at Midway Airport, thinking to myself, I know this field cold. Not even Milton Friedman's going to give me a hard time. So next day, about 5 minutes into my defense, Friedman says, Harry, I read your dissertation. I don't find any bugs in it, but this is not economics, and we can't give you a PhD in economics for a dissertation that's not economics. And for most of the next hour and a half, was spent with Friedman telling me they weren't going to give me a PhD in economics for a dissertation that wasn't economics. At one point, he said, Harry, you have a problem. It's not economics. It's not mathematics. It's not business administration. Marshak shook his head and said, it's not literature, and so that continued. The whole process continued for a while. After about an hour and a half, as I recall, they sent me out into the hall, and 5 minutes later, Marshak comes out and says, "Congratulations, Dr. Markowitz."
That's a nice story. Hey, listen, big picture wise, I have to ask you this question, and I'm sure you get this sometimes for people that don't know you. But Harry, if I'm not mistaken, you're 86 years young.
I'm 86, and so far I haven't hit the wall. I'm writing a book, which comes out in 4 volumes. Volume 1 is out. It's published by McGraw-Hill. It's called Risk Return Analysis, and the subtitle is the theory and practice of rational investing. And as I say, Volume 1 is out. Volume 2 is due at the publisher at McGraw-Hill March 31st, 2015. The next one's 2017, and the final volume is 2019. 13, 15, 17, 19. Right. So I'll be 91. I can't die before I'm 91. I'm a contract.
What advice can you give to people about maintaining their mental acuity and sounding like you're 35 years of age? How does that happen? What have you done with your mind over these years? How do you stay so young?
I mean, you've got to be lucky. There's people who are, take care of themselves and eat right and exercise and die of cancer. So you got to have. My dad lived to 93, I think it was. Stepmother 89, and okay. So you got to be lucky, no matter what you say. But my wife always has a dinner of several vegetables, which are steamed or broiled, but usually steamed. We eat seafood. We try to stick to things either things which do not have a lot of saturated fat in it, like seafood or chicken, white meat, and it's difficult to cook white meat, chicken breast, boneless chicken breast. So she, there's some kind of a sound. Hang on, Mike. There's some kind of, I'm going to close the door. I don't know what's whistling. It sounds like a tea kettle, but we don't have one going.
I just think I'd be amiss by not asking that question. I hope you didn't mind.
No.
I think a lot of people could learn something just from that. They can learn about your portfolio theory, but they can learn about life too, clearly.
Well, okay. So my wife always cooks really healthy meals, and when I'm out, once in a while for my birthday, I'll have a steak with fat on it. But by the average over the long run, we eat quite well, quite healthy. Then I walk. It is my practice to walk a mile and a half to lunch, which turns out to be downhill where where my office is, and then I walk a mile or mile and a half back uphill, at lunchtime, routinely, when I'm at the office, routinely, which is, most days when I'm not off elsewhere consulting. And then, thirdly, equally important to all these others is you've got to keep active. You've got to keep physically active and mentally active. That's it.
Well, that's a pretty good list. I think it's sometimes it's a simple prescription, but it's sticking to it, right? That's the tough part.
Well, after what happened, I have a great aversion to boredom, and so this great drive. As I said in my autobiography that I did for the Nobel, the Nobel Committee prints a small biography and a technical paper for each of their prize recipients. And in my biography, I really hadn't planned to revolutionize the world, to have literally trillions of dollars diversified, in institutional investors and financial advisors and so on, literally, tens of trillions of dollars managed this way, and to the benefit of the world, I do believe. I just was interested. I was a nerd before. I was a nerd before the girls knew that nerds would end up making money, and I read science at a popular level, like an ABC of relativity, and I read philosophy. I read the original philosophers, particularly Hume was a favorite of mine.
Why'd you like Hume so much?
Well, Hume said, even though I take this ball and I release it and it falls and I repeat that 100 times or 1,000 times, I still do not have proof positive that I do not have a demonstration that it will always go down. And of course, many years, a couple of centuries later, despite the fact that Newton's universal theory of gravity, his theory of universal gravity, his law of universal gravity had been tested tens of thousands of times without fail, Einstein found that there were situations where it didn't work. So it was sort of an empirical fact that that was an empirical confirmation of a deep philosophical thought. And I was interested in questions like, what do we know and how do we know it? Just because I was a nerd and I was interested in that stuff. So when I got into economics, I drifted towards the theory of economics under uncertainty. And a colleague and I read the theory of games, Feynman's theory of Feynman Morgenstern's theory of games together, section by section, and would consult, would talk about it afterwards, and after reading it and so on. And so somehow portfolio theory was just a very natural outcome of my my philosophy. I'm a philosopher, basically, not a finance guy. I'm a philosopher, and I did this in high school because I was interested. I worked, as I mentioned before, I've worked in many fields, and got this operations research award because of three things that I had done, and I've done other things, and so just to sit in a park bench, and I like to sit on a park bench once in a while. Very often, if it's a nice day, I'll walk back along the ocean, and I'll sit. There's a particular bench that looks off all into the ocean. This is on my way back to the office. Once in a while, I love to relax. I love music, and I love good food with good friends, and so on and so forth. But in the quiet of my own, most of the time one spends with oneself, and I got to have something interesting to think about.
So let me ask you. So here you are, 1952, launching a paper, a book in 59. As you correctly mentioned, trillions of dollars are essentially being played in markets based on propositions you put out. But if you were coming along 50 years later, would you be a quant running a hedge fund today? No.
I ran a hedge fund from 1969 to 72, roughly. I was at UCLA for a couple of years until I thought, being a full professor gets you on committees, and I don't want to be on any committees. But I became a consultant. When I was at UCLA, I became a consultant to an outfit called Arbitrage Management Company. And then later, the guy who was running it, who was another professor who had got me in, he got us into merger arbitrage. ITT Hartford, it blew up in our face, and the entrepreneur said, "Well, Harry, how would you like to run the portfolio?" I said, "Sure." We ended up moving to New York, where for business reasons. But I had a 3-year contract. With my 3 years, we did, quite well. We did quite well. This was a day when when Mike Goodkin, he's got a book out whose slightly fictionalized version of a slightly fictionalized version of this day, this arbitrage management company days. I'm a little too big. I'm a little too oversized in that thing. Anyway, so I told him that when he asked me to become the portfolio manager, I said the only thing I really understand is convertible arbitrage. I was a convertible bond arbitrager, and had a small staff, and so on and so forth. So after 3 years, I got my percent of the company, besides my salary, and I decided, goosing up the NAV another % every month was not the way I wanted to live life. And so I went off and became I just became a consultant, and then I did a 9-year stint at IBM Research, and then I went to Baruch College, became a distinguished professor, has an endowed chair at Baruch College, and then after 23 years in New York, I said, wait a minute, I'm 65, enough's enough. We're going back to Southern California, and I can tell the difference between Santa Monica and San Diego. We're going to San Diego. Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I think at some point in time, every man, every woman thinks about their legacy. And there's going to be plenty of billion-dollar hedge fund managers out there, probably billionaires, that will never be remembered. I don't think, even 1,000 years from now, I don't think it's going to be hard to go back and find. Everyone's going to still know the name Markowitz. That's got to be a fun feeling, isn't it?
Well, look.
Come on, it's got to be fun feeling, Harry.
Yeah, absolutely. I have said, you were at my offices. I don't know whether we had time to go for a little walk together.
We did go for a walk. I think we went to the convenience store.
Oh, okay. Well, that's, no. Monday I had a visitor, who happened to be a son who's in the finance business in a certain way, the son of a very good friend of mine, Israeli. It turned out, and we went for a long walk. And actually, we didn't have time. We just sat around my offices. Remember, I have these 4 little offices, and we sat around my offices and had a fascinating conversation for long enough, so it was too late to go for my long walk, so we ate nearby. And then yesterday, I also had a luncheon guest. I frequently have luncheon guests who happened to be also Israeli, just happened to get 2 in a row. But he was an A+ student in my class. I teach 2 quarters a year, at UCSD, and everybody's at the old time. Go on lunch with Harry, just give a call, and we'll schedule it in. So he was an A+ student. But somewhere in the conversation between one or the other, I frequently, comment on the fact that there's a lot of people who have gotten a lot richer than I have from portfolio theory. Like a good friend, very close, my good buddy Bill Sharp, with his financial engines, has become very rich, and Bar Rosenberg has become very rich. Now I'm comfortable. You saw I have these 4 offices, and I can afford to support the San Diego Symphony. I can give I can give you the right order of magnitude. I can make a $10,000, $15,000 a year donation to the San Diego Symphony, but I can't give them $100 million like Irwin Jacobs did. So there's comfortable versus rich, but I spend my days doing what I want. My mind is right now I am struggling with a proof of a new theorem that's in chapter 10, which I know is true, but I'm trying to make the proof simpler. And I know there would be a lot of people in the world who would find it hell to have to spend their time struggling with a new proof, but I find that heaven.
Well, you said earlier in the conversation, you don't want boredom. So there's the challenge. There's the puzzle. Hey, I want to get you to expand on something, though, because I think it'd be interesting for the audience. My audience is diverse, but you talked about early on the idea of a hedge fund and goosing the NAV. And now for people that might not be familiar with that, a little bit of jargon, the way I read it, you were essentially saying you really didn't want to spend your life being beholden to clients with messed up expectations. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, no, I had committed myself. It was sort of interesting to actually run money, and I was doing well because NAV, net asset value, that's how much your fund is worth, how much, I think most people know NAV because they look at the NAV of their investment companies, see whether it's gone up or down. It seemed, this was an opportunity to actually manage money, but that was fine. I did it. I've been there, done that.
Mm. Let me shift gears up to the current day, because when I originally reached out to you, I mentioned that I had seen one of your recent interviews and some comments. So what I would describe as the leveraged long only hedge fund industry. How have so many institutional investors, pension funds, retirement monies have been seduced, is the word that I would use. You might be nicer, but seduced to put their hard-earned dollars into these leveraged long hedge funds that seemingly don't outperform putting your money in an index?
I think you have to ask a behavioral economist that question.
I think you've got some thoughts on it.
For example, long-term capital management, they were using portfolio theory. They weren't using option pricing. They were using portfolio theory. But they were leveraged 25 to 1, $100 billion was resting on $4 billion. And some really unanticipated event happened, and the $100 billion, when the $100 billion went to 98 billion, then the 4 billion went to 2 billion, and then when the 98 billion went to 96 billion, the 2 billion went to 0 billion, and you had infinite leverage and so on. So it's a technique. It can be misapplied. And, what 1959 and what 5259 says, tell me, you pick out a universe. Like I have a friend and a client of mine, former PhD, Tony Tessitore does portfolios of closed-end funds, but he's got database and analysis and so on. So for his universe, he has more analysis and apparatus than casual people or most places that would do hedge funds would do. I'm sorry, portfolios of closed-end funds would do. So for your universe, the one that you understand better than anyone, or maybe for asset classes because you don't have any more information about individual stocks than anybody else does. But for some universe, you have to supply me expected returns and variances and correlations, and you have to tell me constraints on the portfolio. Sir Isaac Newton developed the calculus. There's a lot of people that do dumb things with the calculus, but that's not the calculus's fault.
I can't keep you today, Harry. But listen, you've been kind enough to spend some time today. Hey, when I come out to San Diego, I'll be in San Diego within the year. We definitely have to grab lunch. Come on out and let's schedule it so that we can take one of these 1 month. Well, it depends. If you have to be nose to grindstone and do an interview, and we got to be back. No. I've got all kinds of flexibility.
We do one thing, and we go for a walk, and we walk and talk and eat and talk and walk back and talk. And I'm about a mile to a mile and a half away from a large number of very interesting eating, diverse cuisines, eating places. So we'll do that. Call in advance or email in advance, because as I say, the calendar fills up about a month ahead, and then in August we're away most of the month.
Well, I got to get back over to the States first, because I'm calling you today from Saigon, Vietnam. So
Saigon! I figured you'd be in Hong Kong or something like that.
Well, I like to get. I'm in several different locations. Saigon's fun. It's interesting. It's not as Western as some of like Singapore and Hong Kong, but I love the whole area of the world over here. It's quite interesting.
Been to Thailand. We went into Bangkok and then went down to Phuket for a vacation, but other than that, we've been on the beaten track. Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, of course, is an independent state. Singapore is very hot. I like. But Singapore is nice. I mean, it's good.
It's nice, but it's very hot. It's very hot. It's it's funny. I've written 5 books in my career. It's the only place where I've ever been recognized by a taxi driver, because a taxi driver reading a trading book and recognizing me. That's fun stuff, huh? Not Harry Markowitz.
That's wonderful.
Not Harry Markowitz fame, but
great interview, and we'll keep in touch.
Take care, sir. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.